Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video we're going to talk about this and arrow functions in JavaScript. Let's get started. I have this special setup for you today. So on the left is the Visual Studio Code, and on the right we can see the console and some small piece of HTML. So what is this? This is a special keyword in JavaScript. And as you can see, it also colors in blue. So it means that it's something special. And this defines the current property of the current execution context. Sounds complicated. Let's give an example. So if I console log this, just here in the global scope, we can see that it actually refers to the window object, which means, so if I'll do this equals window, it's true. So in the global context, this means the window object. And since that's the window object, you can refer this as a window. So I can do this dot, for example, location, instead of window location, and it will be the same thing because this is window. And this will work. Let's give another example. Let's have an object here. For example, a person. And this person has a name, first name, and the last name. So we have the person. We can now log the person. And we can see Bill Gates. Now let's have a function which I want for the function to show the full name. We can have it here. So let's do this later. Let's do it here. We'll call it get full name. And get full name this time, I'm adding a function to this object, and I'm allowed to do this because that's a JavaScript object. And JavaScript object can have properties, and one of the properties could be also a function. So get full name. I want the get full name will return the full name, which is a combination of the first and last name. And to do this, we'll use the this keyword because I don't know, I can't do something like this. It will work, but if I'll change the first name, this function will no longer work. So what I will do instead, I'll just use this dot first name. I'll add some space and this dot last name. And now, when I in the console, when I use person and I will call get full name, I will get the combination of those two. And this is very helpful. And in this context, when we are inside of this object, the this refers to the main person object itself. And this is why we can use this here, and this here, this time, it's not a window anymore. It becomes this object with the two properties. Let's have another person. I'll rename this person to Bill, and we're gonna have another person called Steve. And I want both of those people, I want them to have this get full name function. So let's try this. So we have Steve, get full name. It will give me Steve Jobs. However, if I use Bill, that get full name, it will get Bill Gates. However, the function is actually, it looks the same, right? It's I don't want to duplicate this code. So what I can do, I can take this function, maybe I'll take from Bill. Let's put this right here, and I'll call it get full name. And this function will work exactly like that. It will use this as a keyword to return the full name. And now, since I have this function here already defined, I can assign it to both of the objects. So both of the objects will have the same function. And this will work exactly the same, as you can see on the right side here. And the way it works is that the this is changed according to where the function is executed on. So it means that if I execute the get full name on Steve, then this here is Steve. And if I will execute on Bill, then the this context will change the Bill. And if, for example, do something different, like window.get full name, although window don't really have get full name, yeah, but we can assign, we can do window dot get full name, and we can assign just exactly like we did with objects. This is a bit tricky, but you can do this. And now window have this property. We now can call it, and we get undefined, and this kind of makes sense because this don't have any window doesn't have any first or last names. However, if we will just call get full name without any object that attached to it, it will return undefined. And the reason is that because we're calling it on nothing, this is the same like window.getFullName. And that means that the this is now the window. In JavaScript, it's important to know or understand what this means, because we're going to use this from time to time. And this is a very handy keyword that we can use. And it's important for us to know exactly what it means in which kind of context. So this is why we have this video, to get a little bit more clearance about what is this special keyword in JavaScript. And this can also change contents depending if the context has been changed, then this will also be changed, just we saw with Steve and Bill. And we can have another example. Let's have a button. Let's have a button here. Button 1. I think I'll have a few buttons. Let's have a few buttons. Now let's rename those. I just want to add an event listener here. First we'll use the onload to define everything that we need. So get element by ID. Let's just do this. And I'm attaching an onClick event to the first button. And I'll use this time, I'll use function, and there's quite a good reason for me to do this. And now I want to console log this, and I'm logging this inside the onClick event. So let's check out what happens when I click on the button. We have the buttons here. When I click, as you can see, this is now the button itself, and it's not a window, it's not something else. And the reason for this is because in the onClick, we're getting into the contents of the button, because we're using the onClick on the button object. And this is how this gets its meaning. This is the object that the function has been invoked on. So because onClick was invoked on the button element, then this will become the button element. And we can do some nice little trick. We can have a new function, we'll call it disappear. or maybe hide, shorter. And hide will just hide the element that it will work on it, or it has been invoked on. This dot style display none, right? This is how can we make objects disappear. And now I want to do a small change. What I want to do is, instead of having this function defined here, I want to assign it to hide, just like that. And I can do this because hide is a function, right? And this is also a function. So it means that onClick must receive a function. And this one is an anonymous function, but because I already have hide, I can just assign this function to the onClick. And note, this is different because I don't want to do this. This will execute the function. This will actually invoke all the progress here. I just want a reference to the function for later use. I will also do this for the rest of the buttons. Maybe better ways to do a for loop here, but for this demo, I'll just have like this, something like this. Now, the onClick it will call hide, and since the onClick was invoked on the button, the this will now be the button that has been clicked. And you can guess now what will happen. As soon as I click on any of those buttons, they will just disappear. And every button, every time I click, the this is a bit different. We can also console log this to see what it prints. Let's test it again. I click on the button 2, and I can see this is the this element. Click on button 4, this is the this. Button 5, 3, and 1. And the important part for you to remember that for functions, this means the one that has been invoked on. Let's have another example. It's a really simple example. Let's have another function, and we'll call this print this. This function is doing something very simple. It just console log the this argument, so we can know who called this and which one this in this context. So if we call print this without any arguments, any nothing, then what do you think will be printed? Think for a few seconds. You can pause the video if you want. And the answer is window. And the reason for this is because we are using print this in the global scope, and the global scope in JavaScript on the browser is window. So this is the same like doing window.print this. And print this will print the object that has been called on. So this is the same. Sometimes it's very useful to change this to give it a little bit different behavior. And let me show you an example for this. If I can call print this, but instead of calling just like that, there's a special function in JavaScript called call. And call, it will call the function, but it also receives an argument, a this argument. So you can actually change the contents of this. If I'll take, for example, Steve from the previous example, which is an object, and I will use this, Steve, as the context, then print this, we'll see now, it will print Steve. Let's try this. And look at that. So now I can use print this, and it will just call this function with a different this context. And this is very useful. And by the way, if we have some arguments here, for example, you can call this with separated, just like that. There's another very similar to call. So this is call. There is something also called apply. And they are quite similar. You can use the same, print this dot apply. What is different about this is that when you use apply, you can still give it a different this in the first argument. And then the second argument, instead of separated arguments which will go to the function, it must be in array. This is the only difference between those two. It's more of a convenience thing. So as you can see, both of those call this, and you can change Steve to be, for example, this is a string. I'll just remove this for convenience, and the result, it actually printed this as a string. So we're changing the context this, and this is very useful in JavaScript because sometimes the this is not exactly what I want. So using call or apply is very useful. And the third one is called bind. This is the same family. So you use it again on a function, print this, the bind, and now it works the same. You can just give it a different object. I'll use Bill from the previous example. And you can also give here arguments, but I will keep it empty, at the moment empty. And the difference between those two, I will copy this to the command line here. When you use bind, you get back a function. It doesn't invoke your function. It gives you back a function with the correct this contents. So you can assign this, for example, print this on Bill. This is a function, so you can now invoke it like that. So the only difference between call and bind is that bind will not immediately call, just returns you a new function with the different this context. As you can see here, if I call print Bill, print this on Bill, it will print Bill. And this is what bind does. Sometimes you'll see that you can even use bind in a shorter way. You can use this as well, like that. So I'm creating a function and I'm immediately invoking it. This is also another way. This will immediately invoke the function. Just like that. So call, apply, and bind are good to remember that they exist, because sometimes you try to get some context of this, and this is not the exactly thing that you expect it to be. Which bringing me to the last topic for this video, is the changes that arrow functions bring us in this context. So going back to the on-click example here, if I want to have the on-click a function, and I will just maybe console log this here. If you remember, when I click on the button, it prints this, which is exactly this button. However, on button 2, I will define an arrow function. And arrow functions behave differently from regular functions. If I use the same code as an arrow function as a different function, I'll get different results. And I'll show you now. So when I click button 1, we'll get button 1, which is the current, this is the current object that has been, or the on-click has been invoked to. If I click on button 2, I'll get window. So why is that? This relates to older versions of JavaScript. So before we had the arrow function, we had only the function notation in JavaScript. And the function notation can change the this according to where the function was invoked on. For example, we saw in the Steve and the Bill example that, and then also in the print this example, when you use a function on an object, it will change the context of this. Sometimes we don't want this. Sometimes we don't want this binding, and arrow functions is a newer way to say that, okay, we sometimes this can be unexpected, so let's have a really simple rule. When you create an arrow function, it will take this from the context where you are creating this function, not where you're using it. So in this case, because we are creating this arrow function in the window on load scope, then here the this is the window, because here console log, if I print this, it will give me window. And arrow function, they don't change the this context, so they will keep a window, just like here. And this is the main difference between arrow functions and the regular functions in JavaScript. You can use both, and it looks a little bit unintuitive to use arrow functions, but in a lot of cases, it makes sense to use arrow functions. And also, don't forget, you can always use call, apply, and bind to change the this context if you're not happy or you're unexpecting the correct this in your function. So that was a video about this and arrow function. I really encourage you to go to MDN and Google for MDN this and check out the examples here. They have pretty good examples, and they have also a broader explanation about how does this work. They have some important information about call, apply, and bind, which also I've explained, and just a lot of useful information. So this is it. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.